The rain came down in heavy drops, drumming on the roof of Obinna's taxi as he navigated the flooded streets of Lagos. His windshield wipers struggled against the storm, barely clearing his view. It was late, and he was exhausted, but he couldn't afford to stop. His family depended on him. Brothers Abignovex reduced the fare small now, his last passenger pleaded, clutching a worn-out bag. Obinna sighed. He was already charging less than usual, but he nodded. No wahala, pay what you have. As the man stepped out, Obinna leaned back in his seat, staring into the darkness. He could hear the echo of Kemi's sister, Funk, from the previous night. This your husband is a nobody, a taxi driver. Kemi, open your eyes. He clenched the steering wheel, his knuckles whitening. They didn't know. They didn't know the life he once had, the betrayal that stripped him of everything. By the time he reached home, the rain had turned to a drizzle. He entered their small, cramped apartment and found Kemi sitting by the dim light of a kerosene lamp, sewing one of their son's torn school uniforms. She looked up, her tired eyes lighting up at the sight of him. "Welcome, my love," she said softly. Obinna forced a smile. He didn't want her to see the weight he carried. But the peace didn't last long. Moments later, there was a knock on the door. It was Funk, her face twisted with disdain. She stepped in without waiting to be invited. "Kemi, I don't know why you're wasting your life here. Do you think this man can ever be somebody?" "Funk, leave us alone," Kemi snapped, but Funk wasn't done. Obinna sat silently, his jaw tight. As Funk's words cut deeper, something inside him stirred. Later that night, after everyone was asleep, Obinna reached under the bed and pulled out a briefcase. Inside were old documents, photos, and a flash drive. He stared at them for a long time, the memories flooding back. He whispered to himself, "Segun, your time is coming." And for the first time in years, Obinna felt hope. The sun was high in the Lagos sky as Obinna navigated the chaotic streets, his mind replaying memories he wished he could forget. The flash drive he had pulled out the night before rested in his pocket, feeling heavier than it should. It wasn't just a piece of plastic. It held the story of his downfall. Years ago, Obinna was a rising star in Lagos tech world. As the co-founder of a promising startup, he was on the brink of signing a life-changing deal with foreign investors. His best friend, Segun, had been by his side since their university days. Working as the company's financial officer, Obinna had trusted him with everything. But that trust had been his undoing. Obinna could still remember the day it all fell apart. The investors had arrived at their office, ready to finalize the deal. He was dressed in his best suit, shaking hands and making plans for the future. But before the papers could be signed, police officers stormed in, waving arrest warrants. "You're under arrest for fraud," one officer barked, slapping handcuffs on Obinna. "What fraud?" Obinna had shouted, panic rising in his chest. The evidence was overwhelming, bank records showing stolen funds, emails linking him to offshore accounts. It was a flawless setup, and it didn't take long for him to realize who was behind it. Segun. While Obinna languished in prison, Segun took over the company, rebranded it, and became the sole owner. By the time Obinna was released, Segun was a billionaire, living in a mansion and married to Kemi's sister, Funk. The honk of a bus jolted Obinna back to the present. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched. That night, after his son had fallen asleep, Obinna plugged the flash drive into their old laptop. The screen lit up with files, forged documents, hidden transactions, and emails from Segun plotting the betrayal. As Kemi watched from the doorway, concern etched on her face, Obinna turned to her. "It's time they know the truth," he said, his voice firm. For the first time in years, he was ready to fight back. The next morning, Obinna woke up earlier than usual, his heart pounding with determination. He couldn't afford to fail. The evidence he had was strong. But it wasn't enough to just expose Segun. He needed to make sure the fallout was public and undeniable. "Kemi," he said over breakfast, his voice low but firm. "There's something I need to tell you." Kemi raised her eyebrows, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "What is it?" Obinna hesitated. He didn't want to burden her, but she deserved to know. He told her everything: the business, Segun's betrayal, and how he'd been framed. Kemi's eyes widened in shock as the story unfolded. "All this time, you've carried this alone?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't want you to suffer more than you already have," Obinna said, holding her hand. "But now I need your support. I'm going to expose Segun, and it has to happen in front of everyone." Kemi's face hardened with resolve. "Whatever you need, I'm with you." That day, Obinna visited an old friend, Emeka, a journalist who used to work for one of Lagos' top newspapers. Emeka had been one of the few people who believed in Obinna's innocence back then. "You're finally ready to fight back?" Emeka asked, leaning back in his chair. "Yes," Obinna replied. "I have all the evidence, but I need your help to make it public." Emeka examined the files on the flash drive and let out a low whistle. "This is explosive. If this comes out, Segun's reputation will be finished." Obinna nodded. "That's the plan. But there's one more thing. I want it to happen at his party next week. Can you arrange for the media to be there?" Emeka grinned. "Consider it done." As Obinna left Emeka's office, he felt a strange mix of fear and hope. The party would be the perfect stage, but it would also be dangerous. If Segun realized what was coming, he could try to strike first. Later that night, as Obinna lay in bed, Kemi placed a hand on his chest. "Are you sure about this?" He looked into her eyes, his resolve unwavering. "I've been quiet for too long. It's time to take back what's mine." The day of Segun's lavish party arrived, and Lagos was buzzing. Invitations had gone out to the city's elite business moguls, politicians, and celebrities. The event was hosted at Segun's sprawling mansion in Ikoyi, a show of wealth that made headlines. Obinna sat quietly in their small apartment, dressed in the only suit he owned. Kemi stood behind him, adjusting his tie with trembling hands. "You're sure this will work?" she asked nervously. "It has to," Obinna replied. "Segun has taken enough from us. Tonight, we take it back." Kemi nodded and took a deep breath. "Let's go." At the mansion, the party was already in full swing. Guests laughed and clinked glasses, their expensive outfits glittering under the golden lights. Segun stood at the center, charming his audience with ease. Funk by his side, basking in the attention. Obinna and Kemi entered quietly, blending into the crowd. Kemi's family spotted them almost immediately, their sneers cutting through the noise. "Ah, Kemi, you brought your driver husband here," Funk said loudly, her voice dripping with mockery. The other guests turned to look, whispers spreading through the crowd. Obinna ignored the taunts, his focus on Segun, as the night wore on. Segun finally took the microphone to address his guests. "Ladies and gentlemen," Segun began, his smile wide. "Thank you for celebrating with us tonight. Success isn't just about hard work. It's about being smart, knowing when to seize opportunities." Obinna's jaw tightened. "Opportunities you stole," he thought bitterly. As Segun continued, the sound of music suddenly interrupted him. The lights dimmed, and all eyes turned to the stage where a special performance had been promised. But instead of a band, it was Obinna who stepped into the spotlight. The room fell silent. "Good evening, everyone," Obinna said, his voice steady. "I have a story to share, a story about betrayal, greed, and the truth." Segun's face froze, his confidence cracking for the first time. Obinna pulled out the flash drive, holding it up for everyone to see. "Tonight, I will show you the real Segun. Let's start from the beginning." The projector came on, casting Segun's sins onto the walls of his mansion. Gasps echoed as the crowd watched, and Segun's carefully constructed world began to crumble. The room was dead silent as the projector flickered on. Obinna's voice rang clear, narrating each file that appeared on the screen. This is the email where Segun coordinated with a third party to frame me. Here are the bank transfers where he funneled stolen funds into my name. And here, he paused, his gaze piercing, is proof of how he took over my company while I sat in a prison cell for a crime I didn't commit. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by murmurs of disbelief. Kemi's family exchanged uneasy glances, their previous mockery replaced with shame. Lies, Segun suddenly roared, stepping forward. His face was red, sweat dripping from his temples. Don't listen to this nonsense. He's just bitter because he's a failure. But Obinna was prepared. He clicked to the next slider video of Segun, recorded years ago, confessing his plans in a drunken stupor during a party. The damning words echoed in the room. Obinna? He's too trusting. I'll take it all, and he won't even see it coming. The crowd erupted. Journalists snapped pictures, recording every moment. Segun stumbled back, his facade shattering as the weight of his betrayal bore down on him. You ruined my life, Segun, Obinna said, his voice steady but full of emotion. But you didn't destroy me. While you were busy living off stolen wealth, I was rebuilding. I invested in a tech startup, and it just went public last month. Now, I'm wealthier than you could ever imagine. The crowd gasped again, their eyes darting between Obinna and Segun. Segun tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. His wife, Funk, stepped away from him, her disgust evident. You lied to all of us, she spat, walking out of the room. As the guests began to leave, Segun stood alone, his empire crumbling. Obinna turned to Kemi, who smiled at him with pride. Her family, now humbled, approached hesitantly. Obinna, Kemi's mother, began, her voice shaky. We were wrong. Please forgive us. Obinna looked at them for a moment before replying. I don't hold grudges, but remember this pride comes before a fall. Hand in hand with Kemi, he left the mansion, leaving Segun to face the ruins of his lies. Outside, the night air felt fresh, full of promise. Obinna had finally reclaimed his dignity, his family, and his future.